Well, here we are, another live stream. I can't believe it's come around so quickly. I still haven't done any Thunderbirds, and Norm came up with this excellent suggestion that I just go back to basics and talk about scenery, which I'm known for, and some of the basics of it. So I thought this week we'll talk about glue. You don't get much more basic than that, do you? Anyway, welcome to everybody who's here. And the first thing I always have to do is thank my moderators, Digger, Norm and Timber. I've definitely seen Digger and Norm in the chat. Welcome to everyone who's, arrived already. But if you're watching it later, don't feel guilty. I always watch them on catch up. Unless it's Second Dynasty. I often manage to catch him because he does him in the day. So, welcome to all the people I've already said, but Wargaming Dad and Andrew Stevenson's just arrived. Great to see you here. And big thanks to Norm for the suggestion what we did. Just a quick update on basically everything whilst I'm waiting for people to join. Because you know what it's like. People arrive over the first 10 minutes or so. Many of you will know that there was a big job that was coming. And it started 4 or 5 years ago. And it went quiet over COVID. And then it came back September a couple of years ago. And it was for a creative director role of a miniature Wonderland equivalent in London. And they thought they were funded last year. And eventually the guy was a real jerk and didn't pay the money across who had agreed the funding. And so it went back out to funding game at the start of this year. Now, this year I also released my first Kickstarter and I had great fun doing it. And I've been thinking for a while, do I really want to be spending my time abroad for 90% of it? Now, if you're a modeller, you'll know that if you're travelling a lot or working really long hours on someone else's projects, your own never get done. So everything that I was really enjoying creatively just wasn't going to happen. So in the end, when they came back a month ago and said to me, Kathy, the job's yours, we've got funding, it's all going ahead, I turned them down. I can't believe it because it was like my dream job and I've been waiting 5 years for it. But somehow in that time, the world had moved on and I'd moved on. I'd moved past it. I'm very content, I think the word is, where I am now. I'm designing for Kickstarter. I'm currently doing lava. It's stretching. It can be a little bit panicking. It is quite solitary is the only downside, but at least I don't have to spend my time in sort of London. Sorry to insult Londoners. Saudi, Japan, China, France a lot. All those countries were going to be heavy hit list ones I was going to have to travel to several times, and some of them far more regularly than that probably. And I love travel, but I don't like it as my job. I've done it and it gets very limiting when you can't do anything because you're in hotel rooms the whole time. So anyway, long story short, I'm doing Kickstarter as my job now. And I'm working on the second one. But more about that when we've talked about glue later. So, welcome to the people who've arrived since. We've got Gluten Tag, so I guess Jaw21's here. Who else has arrived? Ravenson Express has arrived. Hi. Hit the thumbs up, guys. Oh yeah, please like, subscribe, hit the bell button. All the usuals. Hi, Stephen from Scotland, presumably. Welcome to have you. Good to have you here, not on shift. Norm. Oh wow, interesting. Things do change. Yeah, Norm, they do. It's funny how, the last 5 years, I think a lot of people have changed quite a bit. And what your expectations are, what you want to do. Everything changes. So yeah, I was, yeah. And Niga says, the project was fantastic, but they just took way too long to get themselves organised. This wasn't about them. This was about their funders. It takes time to get projects funded. And they had one and he led them on and led them on and led them on, then dumped them. He just never transferred the money and had every excuse under the sun. And it's really hard. You have a signed agreement with somebody to pay you money. It has cost you money to get there. And then they muck you around for months on end. It's quite hard. So I don't think there was much else they could have done and they were just as disappointed. So there we go. Boxcar Jerry says, sometimes it's okay to turn down work. I think so. And I said to a couple of people, and they were just like, it sounds like a dream job, but actually they wouldn't want it. And that made me feel a bit better about it. So Norm, stick around for the talk on glue. Okay, I'll see myself out. Oh no, it's a dad joke, but it's a good one. So Perlite says, at Norm, in elementary school, we had a guy in the class who also liked glue. He always ate the little balls. Ooh, yeah. I used to like, when I was a kid, peeling white glue when you got it on your hands, peeling it off your hands. Now that's quite fun. But anyway, I didn't eat it, can I just say? Not into eating glue. Or sniffing it either. Stephen, actually, I missed your comment. You've got to think of the bread and butter, Kathy. Well, both of them would have paid a lot better than my Kickstarter ever will. It was a really well-paid job, but I wouldn't have been able to follow my dreams. And part of giving up being a well-paid accountant, and I was a much better paid accountant than that job would have paid, part of giving that up, with actually quite a lot of time, I used to have 3 months off between contracts and stuff. I had a lot of time to model. Part of giving that up was to follow the dream. And if you're following someone else's dream, you're not following your dream, I think was where I came to. Tamlin says, name and shame the funny joke. You wouldn't have heard of him. He was just some random person well-known probably in those circles, but you and I'd never heard of him. And I can't actually remember what his name is now anyway. He was so non-exciting. I have met him. He came to meetings and everything and met all the suppliers. So, yeah. Yeah. So Dave, evening all, he's loafing at work. It's a good way to be. I'd never be able to do this when I was at paid work. Now I work for myself, I put live streams on in the day and just call it work because they're crafting live streams. Secret Anorak asked a question, is flour and water still a glue thing? I think if you're like at primary school, maybe. I don't know. It used to be for paper mache, but one of the problems is it goes mouldy. So probably not is the short answer on that one. Stigger says very tacky. We're getting all the glue jokes coming out, guys. See if you can one-up them. So Norm thinks he's a bit of wallpaper hanging there. Andrew, I'm old enough to have got the slipper at school for wasting copy decks when we realised that if you painted it on the back of your hand, it made it look like old and wrinkled. Oh, bless. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember people getting the ruler, but not a slipper. Yeah, there we go. And I've no idea what Lee said, but Lee, welcome to the party. So, other news. I've got my new favourite squash, lime and mint. Can I say, I went teetotal in October. I just felt I was drinking too much on a Friday night, and so I went teetotal for Sober October, and I haven't started drinking since. And my favourite cocktail was a daiquiri, a plain daiquiri. It's like a mojito without the fizzy water. It's just lime, mint and sugar with white rum. Well, you combine Robinson's lime and mint and it tastes just the same without the white rum. And it's gorgeous, so I try and limit myself to one a day. This may or may not be my second today. So, Stephen, I'm off work with an infected, ingrowing toenail. Not nice. Thank you for sharing that, Stephen. But seriously, I do hope it gets better. Not very nice at all. Norm says Copydex is stinky. It's that ammonia, isn't it? I don't really use it very much now, and it isn't on my list of glues to come. So the last time I used it, I think, was for masking something. So there we go. And I do think Digger's on one as well. Good evening. Lee Lavery, good evening in Welsh. I hate to say this because my mum's Welsh, but my Welsh is atrocious and she hates the way I pronounce stuff. So there we go. But I wouldn't have recognised that as Welsh. Not enough double L's. And other news, I am supposedly off work at the moment, not doing work. I sort of am tidying the house. I've got crates of stuff down here. You can still see the crates, that side, that need sorting. I have got to a stage where everything that can hold stuff is now full, and I still have a ton of stuff. I've been spraying a bookcase white to go up into the loft area, all white. And I worked out by the time I spent this much money on spray paint, it would have been cheaper just to buy a whole new bookcase, the same one but in white, because it comes in white, and I had it in graphite for a different room. But hey, it rains every time. It's been rained on 3 times so far spray painting this. So I've had to, steel wire wool it a bit because the etching primer, it actually rained as I sprayed, which wasn't good. So I've just very slowly, and I've got all the recorded stuff to do a video of my new studio, and I've just never got around to doing it. So I might make that a live stream actually rather than a video, and just run through the whole process. So let me know if you'd be interested in seeing, for a future live stream, when it's finished and tidied the studio, my sort of journey from my old space, which was my kitchen, and just overrun and a mess, all the way up to my brand spanking new white shiny studio that looks lovely. I'm inclined to keep it tidier. Everyone's speaking Welsh now. Yeah. Secret Anorak's been put off his pork scratchings. That's true. David, Copperdeck uses ammonia to stabilise the natural rubber solution. I thought it was ammonia. Yep. And Stephen, better news, just passed my first exam at flight school. Human factors, the next one's air law. Well done. Learning to be a little private pilot, aren't you? When I say little, I mean little plane, as opposed to big plane, private pilot. So cool. Right. We probably should talk glue. That was my news anyway. And glue. Glue is one of those topics that doesn't sound very exciting, but I have some really big opinions on. And I've got a little video, so I'm going to play that. I did this for an ebook course I was going to do, which I then never did because I decided I didn't like video editing enough to actually produce the whole course. So I did a 5 or 6, so you'll see this coming up over the next few weeks as we do other tools and materials stuff. I've only got this and tools and materials and a little bit of the stuff done, so it's only the tools and materials bits done. But the first glue that I have to mention, and this is my number one glue that gets used more than anything else in the world, is white glue. I buy it 5 litres at a time. 5 litres, and I go through it. I actually bought 10 litres last time. And it's called PVA, white glue. It is basically water-based, easy. These are often very washable, clean-up ones. You can get it in a variety of thinnnesses or viscosities if you want to be very clever. And yeah, the trouble with this video is if I now try and pause it, it just goes blank. Oh no. Oh, look, that didn't. Let me go back to here. There we go. So we'll go back to white glue while I talk about it. There we go. So white glue is definitely my number one glue. I use it more than anything else in the world. I ladle it on. I spoon it on massively. There are thick amounts of it on every single diorama I ever do. And the reason for that is I use it for everything scenery. Because it's water-based, because it gives you working time, and because it is just so easy to put with other products. I use tile grout a lot. I put AK Interactive Still Water with it, and there was a weird reaction and it all balled up into sort of like grainy lumps. I never have problems with PVA reacting with anything. It's very inert. But the trouble is it does reactivate. So actually if you want to change something later, you can soak it in water and you can pull it up. So, white glue. Where would I use it? Let's just go through. And I'll come to chat at the end of each section and just go through people's comments on white glue. So if you've got any comments on white glue, put it on there. I have used everything from decorators PVA, which is very thin, to go on the walls. I tend to use water washable at the moment. It's quite thin. It's not as strong as proper PVA. It's a type of PVA. You can get clear PVA if you're doing things like water. And it's glossy. I've even, mentioning water, used it to make water. I have a video, it's one of my best ever videos for views, and it's cheap and easy model water, and it's just PVA glue. Now, one of the problems that highlighted to me, and I've used PVA a few times, is it does shrink. There are some downsides to it. I can't, there's just so many plus sides to white glue, but one of the downsides is it shrinks as it dries, because it sets more or less by skinning over and then losing water. So the wetting sort of it, the drying process is how it sets. So it's not a quick glue. You can use tacky glue, and that's what the yellow bottle is here. It's a much thicker glue, so there's less water to evaporate. And I often use that for even sticking figures onto dioramas. Now, when it comes to doing terrain for tabletop games where things are going to get moved, I would use super glue for that, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But for anything which isn't getting handled a lot, going to be mostly upright, white glue is perfect. So let's see if anyone has anything exciting to say about white glue in chat. So Norm says, I for one would be interested. I presume that's in a video of the studio being done, which would be great, because I was thinking of putting it out on YouTube, but I actually thought, oh, there's a lot of footage that I need to edit down. But actually, a lot of people might find it more interesting to talk about it rather than me talk at them about it. So Lee asked a question about Stephen, who's learning to fly. Do you get an E68? No idea what they're talking about. Leave them to it. Digger, Mod Podge has a funny smell. Let's save that for the Mod Podge section, which is coming up next. So, Jaw21, is there any difference between white glue and wood glue? Yes, wood glue has fillers in it. White glue doesn't. Wood glue is generally a slightly stronger version of PVA because you're using it on more functional parts. Craft glues especially don't necessarily need to be that strong, so they're not made as they're not made with as much PVA bit of it. I suspect there's a bit more water in there. So some wood glues often have actual quite big fillers in, so it doesn't shrink as much when it dries, so it will fill gaps as well, which means it can glue larger gaps on wood. And the answer everyone else said, except the price, says Jaw21. No, one is water soluble and one is waterproof. I don't know that wood glue is waterproof, but I can imagine it would be better if it was. But I don't know that there aren't PVAs. They're all PVA glue, I thought, but I think there's some extra stuff thrown into wood glue. Someone told me it was a resin glue, actually. It wasn't white glue and it wasn't PVA, and corrected me on that once. So I actually don't know. I've always assumed it was a PVA because it looks and smells the same. But Digger says wood glue, white glue, basically the same. David Orr, PVA can be used for indoor wood glue, but a lot of wood glues have extra additives in, definitely. Stephen says, it was just 10 questions, mostly just common sense. I'm dreading the radio procedure, but it's got to be done. Yeah, well, my dad was a radio operator for the Merchant Navy, so he learnt Morse and everything. Very cool. That's what he did when he was 16. Stephen Cameron, do you ever use No More Nails, Kathy? No. Short answer, I don't. I'm not quite sure. That's one of the giant, is it one of the ones that comes in a tube like builders use, or can you get it in smaller? You can get it in smaller tubes, can't you? No, I don't. I just use normal wood glue. You'll see that my glues are actually quite limited. I use the same glues and I just buy bulk of them. Secret says, I also buy 5 litres of PVA at a time, the no-nonsense stuff from Screwfix. Yeah, I just buy, I think it's Brian Madge washable off Amazon I bought last time or something, a craft glue. For what I want the bulk 5 litres for, the tacky glue's from Hobbycraft, because it's thicker. And I do like the tacky glue for gluing individual items. Mark Warren says, I use a lot of white glue on my dioramas, rocks, sand. It is also great to get paint foam before painting. Well, I'm going to come on to some of the other uses of it other than glue in a second, but you've touched on that and that's a really good point. So I'll talk a little bit more about PVA. So Digger also uses the PVA from Builders Merchants. Yeah, it's normally good. Sometimes if it's meant for priming walls, it's a bit thin, but it's fine. Hi, Go For It Painting. Welcome aboard. Mark Warren, one of the only glues you use with fibre optics. Oh, that's true. I didn't know that. So, and Digger says, oh, everyone's saying hello. PVA is really good all-round glue. I've always some in the stash. So what do I use PVA for? I've said I use it for scenery. So I will use it for everything, scenery-wise. I mean literally everything. Where I can wait. So if I want to stick a tree on and I want it stuck now, and everything around it is dry, I'll use super glue. Sometimes I use 5mm epoxy for things that need strength, and we'll come on to all those in a minute. But for almost everything else, I use PVA. Now the downsides I mentioned were it takes time to dry. So if you want something to instantly bond, then you can, really PVA, you can go tacky glue and hold it in place and it will be glued more quickly. But one of the reasons I like a water-based glue is because of the way I work. So I'm often rushing to get stuff done for YouTube. I often feel I stop at 95% because I need to get it out the door. And one of the things that I end up doing is I make my base, foam, picture frame more likely. I put on maybe a bit of foam to shape it. I put on sculptor mould, and then I put on the earth layer. At this point, the sculptor mould is still damp, and I put the earth layer on. If it's tile grout with a bit of sand thrown in and I'm sprinkling it on, I'll then drench it all in dilute matte Mod Podge quite often rather than white glue, but dilute white glue will work just as well, and we'll come on to matte Mod Podge in a minute. Dilute white glue and, you know, do the wet water, we'll come on to that in a minute. So loads more water going on there. And if I need to paint anything, like if I paint the sculptor mould brown, which I often do, I can do that in between because again, they're all water-based, I'm using acrylics. So I don't have to wait for everything to dry before I get onto the next stage, because wet-based things can just layer on and layer on and layer on, and they will eventually sort themselves overnight. And if the tile grout cracks, well, that's fine, I can throw a bit more on the next morning. But one of the things I also use is white glue as like a scenic paste. So if I'm doing sculptor mould and I want to put a soil coat on, or if I'm going over plaster cloth on bigger dioramas and there's holes, what I will do is mix white glue and tile grout to get a scenery paste, and a bit of sand in there to coarsen it up a bit, and I get a scenery paste. And white glue is a plasticizer. They even put it in stuff like concrete, I think. But you know, you can put it as a plasticizer, and what that means is it gives a bit of flex to things. So if you're making a paste that you want to dry and you're going to put it on quite thick, adding PVA will stop it cracking. So if I want to put a spackle effect onto the side of a building, I will use tile grout sand and PVA and thin it to the right consistency to put it on, and either brush it on or trowel it on with a palette knife. If I want to put earth on the ground, I will put PVA, tile grout and sand. There's a theme here, isn't there? And put it on. And the magic ingredient in all of those is the PVA, which means you can trowel it on and you can use really cheap base ingredients, whether it's sand, soil, whatever, and the PVA just sticks it all together, stops it cracking and seals it all absolutely solid. It's rock solid then, it's really robust, you can drop it, it's fine. And that is why I love PVA glue. Now, a minute ago we mentioned that it was Mark, wasn't it, from Scale Models, does some lovely stuff, go check him out. He mentioned that it's also great for sealing foam. Now, one of the things that we use as scenery products a lot is foam, the insulation foam, the kind of blue, pink, black as it is now foam, even the white expanded stuff with balls in, because it's cheap and it comes free in packaging. And the downside with that foam is that if you spray paint it, and I spray paint most of my terrain that's big and 3D printed, but for foam I daren't spray paint it, because if you get one little drop in, it will eat it away. And I remember making a 3-foot diameter ON30 roundy with, they're over there somewhere, these little camp cars. It was logging, little porter that went round in circles. Really, really great layout actually, for fun to build. And it had a little cap on, it had really tall trees, massive tall trees. And then this little water splash. It's one of the first things I ever did in model railways actually. Water splash with the porter, which was made out of silicone. And I remember I'd put this rubber river, it's Rubber Rocks River, Cripple Bush I think they're called. And I put it on there and I'd weathered it with oil paints or oil washes or something. Loads of white spirit. And I'd flooded it on and not really thought. And then it just given way slightly. And when I looked, the whole of the underneath beneath the river where the wash had gone down into had just disappeared into a goop of scenery foam sludge. It just all disappeared. I had a huge cavern under my river, which wasn't great. So I had to go and dump a load of sculptor mould in there and fill it up and relay the river. But it taught me a very important thing, that there are definitely things you can't use on foam. But, and this is why I put a thick earth and tile grout layer on, if you use something like white glue, PVA glue, and plaster it on, people use matte Mod Podge, but PVA is cheaper than matte Mod Podge, and we'll come there in a sec. You know, if you plaster it on, it acts as a great barrier. I used foil to make an ocean for a speedboat. You can't paint on foil. You absolutely cannot paint on foil. It's just awful. You put 2 or 3 layers of white glue on, suddenly you can paint it no problem. So it's a great way of just adding robustness and a bit of rigidity, but also a bit of flex, because it will flex still. There's a bit of rubberiness to it, to anything that you do. So if you're going to do something and you're worried about it not being strong enough, impregnate it with PVA and perfect, job done. So anything more in chat on white glue? So Digrid said it was an good all-rounder. If you don't have PVA white glue in your house and you're a modeller, how would be my response. So David says some wood glues are resin-based, resin W for example. I guess the clue's in the name for that. Also Cascamite, which is a dry pounded resin glue, just add water. Yeah, and that's probably why I've heard it. I think the one I used, or the wood glue I owned, I either had Gorilla or Evo Stick, and I'm sure both of those are water-based because they just seem very similar to white glue. And then Tamsin says she buys the 1 litre bottles of Wilko or Dial wood glue. So Dial is the B&Q brand. I think Eva Stick's the green and red one. And I bought Gorilla off Amazon, I'm sure. So there's loads of different ones there. I can't say as I would spend the money on wood glue for scenery stuff. I think, you know, you want a easily dissolvable white glue for the kind of things that I'm doing. And yeah. And then Steamer says, I found that No More Nails is relatively benign, but it's probably overkill. I don't really know what No More Nails, what makes it No More Nails. Hi Timber. Better late than never. I've thanked the mods already, but here you are, so thank you. Tam's in Tusk, go and stand in the corner. If you can find the corner on the chat. Stating the obvious, Cascamite is nasty. I used for woodshut. Cascamite is nasty. I used it for workshop joinery. Urea formaldehyde. Oh, that doesn't sound great at all. So loads of hellos. Extruded polystyrene. Yes, but it's not just extruded polystyrene. There's XPS, but there's also other ones that are also made from polystyrene. Does wallpaper paste have any uses other than the obvious? I think I used it for paper mache once when I was making something in paper mache. I have packets of it and I haven't used it in years. Actually, what I've used was celluclay when I last did paper mache, which has a glue in it, so I didn't need to really add anything. But yeah, or papier mache it should be. Tamsin, none that can't also be done with PVA. Yeah, I would just have PVA. I'd rather just have 5 glues. I've got a whole cupboard full of glues and I still just buy the same ones again, same brands, everything again, because it's just easier. I am going to start using up some of my other glues. And it's not to say there aren't better glues out there than some of these things, but one of the main things of PVA, one of the best selling points, is probably the cheapest glue you can buy. It is dirt cheap. You know, 5 litres costs absolutely nothing. And you can get it in almost every country. Somebody said to me once, you know, use all these products and I can't get them in my country. And so I made it was about water, I think. So I made the cheap and easy model water using PVA because, you know, you can use PVA for practically everything. Just if you're going to do water with it, put it on thin because it will shrink. If you pour it on thickly, it will pull away from the edges. Yeah, Timber says wallpaper base is not very strong. That's why it's on very much a flat to flat kind of join. Lee, I have used PVA as part of a coat for D&D dungeon tiles mixed with brown grey paint and a bit of water. Yeah, I tend to use Mod Podge for that because it seems to be the trendy thing to do, but I've used it a lot to seal with painting. So timber, Gorilla and Evo Stick have extra ingredients that help with gluing wood. I can imagine that it's a little bit of packing, so that because PVA will go to nothing if you're not careful. Secret Anorak. I use watered down PVA to soak string in if I'm using it as rope for tarps, wagon loads, etc. It's also easier to shape and keep its position once dry, and it can still be painted. Well, that's a very good idea. Timber, the white one with little balls, is expanded polystyrene. Yes, there's expanded extruded, and then there's the stuff you get that's Celotex that has another name that isn't the same stuff. So the other thing that I just want to talk through quickly is how I use the PVA for scenery when I'm gluing down vegetation, static grass we'll talk about at the end, but similar. And that is to use wet water. Now I've actually got a slide for wet water later, but one of the things with PVA glue is it's quite thick, and I tend to spray Mod Podge rather than PVA at the moment. But whatever it is, I have bottles of slightly thicker concentrations, and people ask me for recipes all the time, but your mileage will vary depending on your spray bottle, your dropper bottle, your PVA, because PVA can be any thickness from tacky to practically water, and some spray bottles will spray much better than others. Mine clog, so when I'm doing matte Mod Podge, I can only put about a sixth matte Mod Podge in there before it starts clogging when I spray it. It just won't spray properly. So I tend to use a concoction for these types of craft glues, somewhere between 1/3 glue to 2/3 water if I'm dripping it. If I'm doing it to spray, it's nearer 1/6 of glue, whatever the glue is, and 5/6 water to get it through my spray bottles. So what happens is if I'm doing bigger stones, I will drip more glue on them afterwards. But what I like to do is spray the wet water, and it settles down the tar grout, it settles down your flighty little stuff that might fly away. If I've had thicker, bigger items, I might have put some white glue on them when I was putting them in place, so they've already got some glue on them, especially big rocks. And then I spray it with the glue. Having sprayed it with the wet water, what wet water does, there's various different sorts, so we'll talk about that in a second because it's a key part of gluing actually. Deserves its own section. What wet water does is break the surface tension. And once you've broken the surface tension, the glue will go in, especially on something fine like tar grout. Adding sand to tar grout is another way of helping break the surface tension down a little bit because it's coarser. But your glue won't soak in to your scenery unless you put something. It'll just ball on the surface quite often, and it can screw up how your scenery actually looks. So I like a nice wet base when I'm putting on the wet water, and then I spray on the glue. Once I've sprayed the glue, I normally go around with a dripper bottle to anywhere that needs extra glue, and it's on 1/3 PVA. So that's it. That's how I do everything. Obviously static grass, you might spray, you're going to be painting it on with a brush because you want them to stand up right, you want it to be a bit thicker, but you might spray, instead of a layering spray, which you can buy, you might spray dilute glue on and then do another layer of grass over the top. So you can just spray glue. Right, so digger, is that the stuff they call styrofoam over the pond timber turf? I have no idea. I thought styrofoam was something different because you get styrofoam cups over here, don't you? But they are white balls. Andrew Stevenson says, important not to confuse EvoStick white glue, green, and EvoStick contact adhesive, red. I do like their contact adhesives. I didn't put it in here because I used it in cosplay. I haven't really used it in modelling. Sometimes only the brown EvoStick will do, sticking metal to wood where you need more strength than super glue. Yeah, I tend to use 5-minute epoxy then. So Timber Surf, styrofoam is XPS. John JL Roback, welcome. I prefer Mod Podge because it comes in a matte finish. We're about to get there. So you have jumped the gun. Hi, Monique from Monsville Railways. Nice to see you. Right, so now that we've mentioned that, we'll have to just play through this again. And that, I think, is most things on PVA. It's an interesting glue. I use it where I probably shouldn't. I'll glue everything with it if I can, because that tacky glue bottle is right by the side. It's less offensive than super glue. You have time to reposition. I can prop whatever it is. Most of my diorama stuff's probably propped in place while it's drying, and it just will work so much better. So I'm a huge fan of the tacky glue. I use that a lot. Store it upside down so it comes straight out because it's quite thick. And this Hobbycraft glue is just the only one that fitted in the frame. I need to use it up. And when you dilute it, make sure you shake it well and get it nice and diluted. And that's actually why I use the washable ones, because they dissolve so much better than the thicker ones. But you do need it thin enough to spray or use. But one of the trendy things that people use is matte Mod Podge. And what's the difference? Well, it's got an additive in it, and you can get it in matte and you can get it in gloss. But it's got an additive so it doesn't re-wet as much as normal white glue. It is a white glue of sorts in that it's white, but it smells different, and I think it does re-wet a little, but it comes in matte. And one of the problems with white glue that you will find is that if you plaster it on, it is going to dry shiny, and shiny glue is not great. It's a sign that you've kind of glued something. So if you're spraying it, and I spray my glue first, as I said, and you catch the side of something else that you've put in there, like a bridge or a building or something, and it's putting on some extra, if you put white glue on, you can suddenly have put a little gloss glimmer onto your whatever it was, and that's not great. But if you put matte Mod Podge, it will probably dry, maybe a little bit white chalky if it's thick, but it probably won't dry particularly obvious because it's matte. Other than that, it is slightly, I mean, I use it to spray because it's matte. It is more expensive. It's not cheap. I think it's actually Australian. Played, maybe it's American. Whatever it is, you can get it in these big bottles, but it's not cheap. But because I'm diluting it so much, it doesn't really matter. If you're going to do a whole layout rather than dioramas, you will notice the price mount up on it. And please don't do what I did. The other day I was adding static grass splodges on, and I realised I was using gloss Mod Podge instead of matte Mod Podge, and I had gloss glue splodges everywhere. Yeah, and putting matte over the top really doesn't fix it. It wasn't great. So Seeker Anorak, sneaking ahead to the wet water section. He uses glass cleaner via a sprayer to moisten a surface before dribbling PVA. No balling in, it stokes straight in. I think pure tile grout will often ball no matter how much you spray on it, because it's just such a fine powder. But you know, you can spray neat IPA on it and it will still ball sometimes. But that's fine, you can put another layer on. But I've got glass cleaner. I used to use it when I was airbrushing as a dilutant, but maybe I should try it and use it up. So they're still talking about foam. And Tamza says you can get Mod Podge in satin as well. I think for everything I want it for, either matte or gloss. Where would you use it for satin? Interesting thought. So, and Digger says gloss for water effects. I use the gloss Mod Podge. I use the gloss Mod Podge a lot for water effects. It is very nice. It's a bit thin, doesn't really hold much structure, so it's okay for thin ripples or putting a shine on a surface. What I find though is both PVA glue and Mod Podge, over time the dust will settle on them and it almost sticks into the surface. Mod Podge is more resistant because it's a sealer, so you can get away with it more. But if you find that your water's gone sort of dull and cloudy, I picked up my snow diorama, one of them, yesterday to glue the people back on and put it back under its cover. Now I've got the room set up, and I can't remember what it was. I presumed it was something like a Mod Podge, but I don't think it was. It had gone matte the whole way up the water, so I just put Tamiya clear lacquer over the top. Tamiya clear is just, it's a acrylic paint, it's an acrylic lacquer. It is just brilliant. It's the best gloss you can get but it's no substance, so that was cool. Tamsin, I believe that Mod Podge is PVA plus acrylic gel medium. There's definitely something in there. I'm just not sure what it is. And when I read articles ages ago researching it, it was kind of secret. Nobody really knew what it was, so everyone was guessing. Timber says PVA also dries white if it is in a damp, cold environment. I'm just going to say that does depend on your PVA glue. So cheaper PVAs have more padding in them, so they will have more filler, like talc, added into them, and they will dry more white. You can get clear PVA glues though, and I've got those. I've got one bottle of it somewhere. I got it in Hobbycraft. And so I will say they don't all have that. I found when I was doing my water that some brands have got a lot more mattifying talcy filler in it than others, and it really depends what the product's for. But you can get some that have practically none in and dry clear. You can get others that will dry quite white, so it does depend on the brand and the filler content. And Digger doesn't like the smell of PVA. I get it. It's not a nice smell. It's not a bad smell, it's just not a nice smell. So Monzel says PVA shrinks as it dries, which can be a problem in some areas. Yeah, I don't think it. How can I put this? If you put 1/8 of an inch or a sort of thicker, you put like 4 or 5 mil of PVA onto a river, it will shrink at the edges definitely. If you mix it in with tile grout and sand and stuff like that, I have never noticed that shrink. Because the tile grout and sand acts as the solidity and the glue sets around it. So I think it really depends what you're using it for and how you're using it as to whether you get shrinkage. I've not noticed it shrink particularly when using it to glue scenery, which is okay, which is what I'm usually using it for. So Kenta asks, any remedy to Mod Podge drying tacky sticky? I've never had my Mod Podge dry tacky sticky. That's really interesting. Mine's always dried super good. I've had it take the gloss take a long time to clear out. So when I stopped using it for water effects with any thickness, because it would just take ages for the bits to the thick bits to dry clear. But I've never had it tacky or sticky. Another coat is always the answer. It's the same with resin. If your resin doesn't set, just put another coat over the top. So a brand new Mod Podge or something else over the top just to seal the sticky tacky layer in. John, there is also a Mod Podge hard coat product now. I've got some but yet to use it. The hope for me is that it won't be as bendy as the other formulations of regular PVA. I'd be intrigued why you don't want it to be bendy and what you're planning to do with it. I actually quite like the fact that PVA is bendy. I think the flexibility of it is one of the advantages when you're doing scenery. So when you drop it, it absorbs shocks, it doesn't shatter, it adds flex to products like tile grout, which may well flake off otherwise. So actually I use it a lot for its flexibility. So I'm intrigued why you need it, just what you're doing with it that's hard, and whether it's something that I've just not thought of. So there we go. So matte Mod Podge. Mod Podge is definitely great. It's what I use actually because it's matte over PVA a lot of the time. Most of it's sprayed through my spray bottles. But it is very, very similar in a use case to PVA. I use it for scenery. I don't add it in necessarily to tile grout because I think it's too expensive for that, but I do add acrylic paint to it and use it as a sealer for foam and things, and it is great because it's thin and paints on nicely, so it's great. I do like my Mod Podge. It is more expensive. I use PVA for anything in bulk. But now we're on to super glue, and I use these cheap Everbuild super glues. The tops often dry out quite quickly. I tend to buy really small bottles as a result, so I can just throw them in the bin without losing too much. And these are great. I buy thin and I buy thick. I like thick for gluing things, but I love thin for being able to drop it on and it will go through. one of the things I also use PVA glue for is tissue over something to make a tarpaulin. Well, something thicker than tissue, because tissue's not that great and it has patterns normally. But something over the top of a drape, like a tarp over a crate, I'll use PVA or matte Mod Podge if it's in the bottle to set it up. But one of the problems with sort of that sort of thing is it's still got that flex, and that's where that hard coat came in. So sometimes I'll use super glue where I want solidity. If something's I'm trying to think of an actual case where I could use it in this way. Balsa wood, for example, is very soft. If you impregnate it with super glue, it can thicken it as well. So if you use that as a glue, the very thin stuff will soak in and actually make the balsa wood a bit tougher. But I use super glue, and the thing that isn't in the picture that I use super glue the most is the zapper. And that's when I use super glue. When I need to glue something that white glue shouldn't glue. I mean, I use it to glue metal to wood and all sorts anyway, white glue. But if you're trying to use something that you want to zap straight away, so tree. I'm building a wire tree and I want to glue the branches on. If I wanted to use white glue, I'd have to prop each branch in place and wait for it to go off. It would take days. Super glue, put it in place and spray it with a zapper, and it is off within a minute or two. If it's a deep hidden part, it takes longer for the zapper to work in, then it may still release. So I kept moving I was attaching minis to bases the other week, and I kept moving them and I kept pulling them off because it was still wet. It sort of set around the outside but not in the middle. So super glue does need something like air to go off, but it is a really useful instant glue. But when you spray it with zapper, it's more brittle and it will often go white. It's actually quite a good frost effect. So I don't like to do the zapping if there's not a fine or something going on, because it can create kind of a white cloudy bloom. Yeah. But it is one of my favourite glues for instant. And also if you're doing things like metal, etch, whatever it is, etch brass, whatever it is you're doing, some of those things, white glue doesn't work. Super glue's your next best bet. So, Tamsin said, never used for Mod Podge, filling layer lines on 3D prints. I had never thought of that. Oh, that's fascinating. I feel experiments coming on. Norm says, thin CA is good for capillary action. That's exactly what I was trying to say. It's great for soaking into you can almost drip it on and it will just run through. Lee Lavery, get some acetone when you're working with super glue, just in case you stick your fingers together. Don't ask me how I know. I actually got super glue all over my brand new worktops, and I've got a super glue remover and it pulled it off. But I didn't realise acetone would do that, because the super glue remover doesn't smell like acetone. So that's good to know. Thank you. And one of the reasons I don't use super glue more is it does stick everything, including your fingers. The glue I haven't put on here actually. Oh, yeah. I'll talk about that in a minute. So, best glue for balsa is aliphatic glue or yellow glue in the US. Is good for wood and dry, is heat resistant and waterproof, sets at low temperatures and does not shrink. Well, that's cool. I mean, I'm usually using balsa with white glue, so that's good to know. Timber surf, super does not need air. It actually sets with the water dampness in the air. Cool. Thank you, Timber, for that. That's a good point. So if it's not setting, you can spray it with water, but zapper is quicker. Have you a section for Pritt Stick? I actually do use Pritt Stick, and I'm always regretting it 6 months later when everything peels back off. So yeah, I haven't, because I find it doesn't last. It's just a bit thin. The one glue I haven't put on, which I'm going to mention now, is Tamiya Extra Thin. Plastic Magic is the same thing, or Mech Pack, or whatever it is you want to call it. It's the plastic glue used for making plastic kits. And I've been doing Legion a lot recently, and they have 2 sets of minis in that. They have soft plastic minis, which I think are PVC, and then they have hard plastic minis, which are ABS, which is styrene that we all know and love. it's like acetyl-butyl styrene, or something is the full name, ABS. And that's plastic injection moulded. So every mini that you get from them is either soft or plastic. Now I use Tamiya Extra Thin on all of mine, and apparently Tamiya Extra Thin also has some acetone in that will work with the soft plastic minis. But they recommend super glue for those. And what I found, it's been interesting, some of the really fine delicate parts, you use these plastic glues, and I love Tamiya Extra Thin. I use it for all of my injection mould kits, all of them, apart from obviously the ones that are glue free like Gundam. And I glue them with it. It capillaries in, it comes with a little brush in the bottle. It's a square bottle, so it's hard to knock over, but you can, because I have. And it's really cool. I love it. It's a great product. And it was interesting because people were saying, oh, when you're doing these really fine, delicate, thin joints, super glue won't dissolve the plastic. And Tamiya Extra Thin actually dissolves your plastic and creates quite a firm bond, because it's basically dissolved the plastic and then reset liquid plastic as solid plastic. You can still wrench it apart for a while, because it takes a while for it to set up. So it's probably 24 hours, which is good because the last set of buildings I did had the wrong instructions. So I had to wrench the buildings apart to put the stuff in the right location. But that's fine. It worked. It wrenched apart. And so that's a really important glue if you're doing plastic injection moulded kits. So basically plastic kits are almost always that. But for any kits that are like resin or these soft plastic minis, you'll need super glue, because the kits don't glue with Plastic Magic or Tamiya Extra Thin. So hot water will break the bond on stuck fingers, so stating the obvious. Tamsin, safety tip, don't mix super glue and heat. Oh, I have done that once, and it creates, the clue's in the title, cyanoacrylate. It creates cyanide. Not a good idea. Definitely not a good idea. So yeah, don't do that. And I do sometimes burn super glue off things if you are extract well, really extract well. And I do have an extractor fan at the front of my desk now. It's a mixed bag, that. It's brilliant because when I'm doing stuff with chemicals, I can pull it up and the extractor fan sucks everything across my desk. It's not that vicious, I mean, it doesn't suck stuff, but it sucks the fumes. But it creates a little bump on my desk because it's not flush. And so I was trying to put out my 3 foot by 3 foot terrain board, and the one at the far end is like tilted slightly. Anyway. So MEC, methyl ethyl ketone, is the base for all the welding plastic glues. Yeah, I used to have MEC pack, or just plain MEC, which was that. But actually some of these things like Tamiya Extra Thin also have acetone and some other solvents in, so they can cover a wider set of plastics. Is MEC the same as polystyrene cement that we used to use for Airfix models? It's a constituent part of it. Tim's scooting in late. He's been on the footplate this weekend, just got home. Hi Tim, nice to have you here. Tim's the new owner of my Port de Norwich, so go follow him, and he's doing amazing stuff with it at the moment, mechanising it. And it will be at the Barla Lake Show on the September the 16th, 17th. So you'll be able to see it there if you want to see it. And he's been making all the wagons on the back move, which were hand pushed and pulled, so they weren't ever done with a loco. He's got them in little brass rods moving back and forth. It's on his YouTube channel, which is something really weird, like Fairy Queen or something is his name. Oh, Tim, what is your YouTube channel called? Anyway, I'm sure you'll write it in a minute and everyone will go, that's not Fairy Queen, what's she on? But yeah. So, MEC is part of polystyrene cement. MEC on its own is just liquid thin, whereas some of the polystyrene cements were thicker. I would always advocate using the water thin ones and a very fine brush, and letting the capillary action take it down your joint. The worst thing though is when you're holding it and the capillary action takes it under your thumb and you've got a fingerprint on the side of your model. Just let it go off and sand it. Lee, no, there are other solvents that can melt plastic, including acetone. But it is a major part of, MEC is a major part of most of them. So, polite, sometimes I've had to resolder LEDs embedded in CA. Oh, yeah, that'll probably be killing you. It's a few brain cells gone from that, I'm sure. Oh, Tamara says, less the cyanide and more the vaporised CA will bond to moist surfaces such as eyes and nostrils. That's very true. And if you see anything in CSI where they put it in that cabinet and they put a little pot at the bottom and they vaporise something and it sticks to the fingerprints and makes them look white, that is cyanoacrylic normally. Just my little useful fact. Flossy sheep, not fairy queen, flossy sheep. Oh yeah, Flossie's still a bit of a girly thing to me. My mum used to call me Flossie, and I'm a girl. Fairy queen, flossy sheep, same thing. Okay, flossy sheep, go look at it and you'll see. John Jr. Roebuck, I like CA glue and baking soda trick. So what he means there is when you're trying to fill gaps, if you add baking soda to cyanoacrylate, it fills gaps very well and you can use it as like a cheap filler. I personally never use it because I've had a lot of problems with it. And I don't know if I'm not putting enough baking soda in, but what I find is that the cyanoacrylic glue is more solid than the plastic around it. So when I come to sand, it stays as a sort of island and the other plastic around it is softer and gets worn away first. So I can never quite get rid of it. I'd rather use an actual filler for that, but that might be I'm not quite putting enough baking soda powder in it. Baking is, yeah, bicarb or whatever it is. So everyone's remembering flossy sheep now. So that's super glue. You need this, and you probably need thin and thick. You also need the zapper. I just buy the spray one, but you can buy zapper from Plastic Magic, Deluxe Materials, same sort of brand, and it comes as liquid in a bottle, and you can actually decant it into little bottles and use it in drops, which doesn't go everywhere. The downside with that is it evaporates out very quickly, so I end up with just empty bottles which used to have it in. And their little spray pumps break quite quickly as well, because I think the zapper's quite a nasty chemical. So yeah, so super glue to me is a must, but never apply it out of the bottle. Just like never out of the bottle. I get, and there are much better ways to do this, people get all sorts of little fancy nozzles and all sorts that go on it, but I just find they clog. I'm just not great at keeping super glue from clogging. So I just put a drop out on a bit of post-it note or old business cards, because I've got a lot of those, and I use cocktail sticks, and I've been doing that for 20-30 years, cocktail sticks to apply my super glue. Cocktail sticks, toothpicks they're called in the US, but they sound quite, cocktail sticks just sounds better. So there we go, so that is super glue. And I did have Gorilla super glue, and I got a really bad batch and every single one of them dried. So I've stopped using that for that reason. Tim, I'm also in the NGRM online forum, Tim1MW, and post to the 009 modelers group on Facebook, also Kathy's Discord. Woohoo! If you're not on my Discord, one of my mods will put a link on. Go join my Discord, because it's actually where I post more than anything else. It's mostly lava at the moment because that's what I'm busy designing, but you can then feed in to what I'm actually doing, and I post far more there than I do any social media. Though I did join Threads, which is apparently like Twitter, but I was never on Twitter anyway. I don't really get Twitter. So whether Threads will last, who knows? Tamsin's saying you can use talc instead of bicarb. I always have a bottle of baby powder, partly because it smells nice. But mostly I've used it for casting stuff, because the fine powder lets things creep into the corners. So yeah, a little bottle. I mean, you can get little bottles for babies. So yeah, a little bit of talc's really useful. My next glue of choice is 5-minute epoxy. Now, 5-minute epoxy does exactly what it says on the tin. It's 5 minute. It's epoxy because it's 2 parts. This is a syringe sort. You can get them with different tubes, and you have to mix it equal parts. Again, I use a post-it note or a business card and a cocktail stick to mix it. You can get it in crystal clear if you're doing something that's going to be like visible from water for some reason. And it's brilliant. It sets really solid, it's really strong. It's great for applying odd materials to each other, like metal to wood. And it's got a lot bigger bond than superglue. It does take 5 minutes to go off though. So what I often do is the 2-glue trick. And yeah, I presume you could do this with white glue as well if you wanted, white glue and super glue. But super glue, you can zap and it will set more or less instantly. 5-minute epoxy will take 5 minutes, but it can actually take slightly longer if it's cold. So over the winter, it will take much longer than 5 minutes to go off. In the summer, it will set more quickly. So the idea is you put dots of super glue on and dots of 5-minute epoxy, and then you put your parts together, spray the zapper, the super glue holds, but it's not as strong as the 5-minute epoxy. The 5-minute epoxy is held in place though by the super glue, sets up, and you've got a really strong bond. So yeah, but 5-minute epoxy is definitely one that I use a lot in my tool belt. Again, this is just a builder's one from Amazon. Other sales places exist, but don't deliver next day, and I have to go out to them. So Stacey, you always said the carbon dioxide in your breath will speed up the setting time too, so I didn't mention that, so that's cool. Right, where are we? Tim is also Fire Queen used to operate on the Padan Railway, which took Slate to Port de Norwich, and that might be why Fairy Queen popped into Caddy's head. I think Flossie Sheep just went... I got the F right and the Y sound. Threads, once you join, there's no unjoining, lol. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm on TikTok and Twitter, but I never post or do anything with them, ever. So you just let it die, don't you? It's interesting. Lee Lavery, Araldite, my dad used to swear by it. Yeah, it's always been, my dad used it as well, that's where I first saw it. And he used plastic, sort of a really grey, solid, stinky one as well. Oh, and Timber's put up the Discord server. Thank you very much, Timber. That's cool. Well done. So he mixes it on paper, then heat up with a flame underneath. It goes off in seconds. I had not thought of doing this. I was just talking about temperature. I could just put it in my 3D print room. So my 3D print room has 4 printers in it that are going at the moment, filament printers and a resin printer going. And it will not fall below about 26 degrees in there. And I have all the door wide open now to try and keep it cooler, because my prusser was heat creeping at 28 when I was running clear filament through it. I don't think it heat creeps at 28 on over to your PLA, the solid stuff. I think it was the Sunlu translucent. But yeah, I've had to watch the temperature quite a bit. And Timber also says that it goes thin so it can get into crevices easier. This is if you heat your 5-minute epoxy. Some people use it for water effects. Black Magic Craft often does it. I'm guessing it's just because he has it on hand. So you can use it for water effects, but I'd rather just use something else, to be honest. My biggest problem is getting it to plunge evenly and getting the same amount out of both sides of the tube. For some reason, the yellowy coloured side never seems to come out as much as the white coloured side. Or the clear, sorry, coloured side. Oh, we're getting to hot glue? Oh, Norm has. Sorry, Monique has just asked a question. So what's the difference between hot glue and epoxy? Hot glue bonds quickly, right? So, hot glue. This is like a glue that I've got into more recently in the last couple of years. It has upsides and it has downsides. The upside is it's a really good glue. It's easy to get things out of it if you want to break the bond. A little bit of IPA, isopropyl alcohol, and the bond will just pop straight off. Also take paint off if you're not careful, but you can get stuff straight off. You can actually just wrench it off a lot of surfaces. I've glued things with it and they've come apart over time. So that's the downside. But the plus sides, and the real downside, it's hot and you'll get blisters if you put it on your hands. Rub it quickly together to cool it off and then it will pull off, is what Adam Savage says. I'm sure he's right. But hot glue is brilliant because it fills gaps. It goes on, it sets relatively quickly. It has to cool to be set. I use it a lot when I'm doing LEDs. So if you saw my latest video, which was lava, I literally am putting LEDs strips down and I use this to secure them in place, secure wiring in place so it can't pull or yank. So it's really useful for big stuff because it's easy to get out big glue everywhere and do stuff. But it does, if you want to glue two items flush to each other, if you put hot glue on, I find there's a number of issues. If it's a big item, often the one end has cooled before the other end's been fully hot glued, and when you put them together, somehow it's just a little tackier, so it isn't as thin. And once it starts to set up, it's quite thick. It's hard to squash it flush. So I found when I was doing a building this sort of size, it wasn't working. So what I used to do then was put white glue as the glue and put 3 or 4 dabs of the hot glue to hold it down. It's that double glue effect again. Hold it in place whilst the white glue, which took ages to set up, set it up. But hot glue I do love, and I use it more and more. This is like a mini hot glue gun. It's not the miniest you can get smaller ones. And for those of you with children, you can get low melt hot glue, which I have no idea if it's as good as hot melt glue, but it won't hurt your children in the same way as this would. I've got a little Bostik glue pen, which is what I use 90% of the time. It's quite small, it's battery operated, wireless, so it's easy. But I have 3 or 4 glue guns, and I'm still looking for one that doesn't dribble. All of them string. It's just the downside of it. It can leave strings everywhere in your work. But what's the difference with that and epoxy? Well, epoxy is a chemical reaction to set up, and it gives out heat whilst it does it, so it can get hot. And it's 2 chemicals. You're mixing the 2, they go off in 5 minutes, they react with each other. Hot glue gets heated, squirted out, and then cools and sets as it cools. Raymond Legg says super glue fix all adhesive. That's true. Even the things you don't want fixing get fixed. Timber says epoxy is much structure and won't remelt if you heat it. Yeah, that's true. Digger, hi Raymond. Right. And a few highs back. David, and then no matter what you do, you'll always get some hot glue on your skin somewhere. Oh, tell me about it. Oh, yeah. Timber says have a pot of water nearby using hot melt so you can dip your fingers in it. Actually, the Adam Savage method of just squidging it around, spreading it out, actually does work quite well as well. But I was worried that I'd take the blister off when I did that. But I've done it, and it actually does work quite well. So Raymond Legg says, I use multi-purpose cement for plastic moulds, either that or Testor's cement in the blue tube. The red tube is too caustic. You just don't see Testor's cement over in this country, so it's not one I've ever seen. I think our nearest would be something like Revel or something like that. So I use Tamiya because it's the bee's knees. And it comes in the bottle with the handy brush. But before that, I used to use Mech Pack with a brush and just used a brush plus a normal paintbrush. Tim, I have a love-hate relationship with hot glue. It's very useful, but I feel I've never quite mastered it, and it always seems to make a horrendous mess with it. Yes, it also has really, I've seen people use it to make lava, water effects, ice effects. It has a lot of effects other than just glue because it sets. It's not quite clear, but you can get it in different colours. You can get it in black as well and other colours. So I've got a little set of coloured ones that came with it. I've never used them. So, there's other things you can do with hot glue. A lot of people use it and are very happy with it. I find it messy. So I use it for structural parts, but not too much structure because it does fall off. I was putting up some dioramas, I still haven't done them all yet, and one of them is hot glued acetate and PVC, foamed PVC board, and it's just coming off. So I super glued it instead. Stating the obvious, new arrivals, make sure the red live marker is on under the video window. Okay. Yeah, I always fast forward to the end and it does the same. But don't press the forward button because that takes you to the next video, which is really annoying. Stephen, I saw a guy at the Perth show some years ago using hot glue and florist wire to make trees. Even Gray Feynman made it look good. Yeah, it's quick. It is good. People use Elmer's glue and toilet paper towels to make water. People do. And I put a picture of it in the book I wrote, which was Märklin of Sweden. Martin did it. And it was, well, I don't think he used Elmer's glue because he's not American. He would have used just normal white glue over here, I think. He's Swedish, so he definitely didn't probably use Elmer's. But Elmer's is just white glue, I think. And it looked really good. I personally have never actually done it. I guess I just haven't needed to. I haven't done any water that needed that kind of Ripley technique that he uses, but it looked really good when he did it. So after hot glue, I mentioned you can actually get hot wood glue guns, which I presume have got a more solid, so it's the glue stick that changes, a more solid. And this is a small gun. If you want to glue big stuff, you can get bigger guns. But the problem I found, this big building I was trying to glue was actually foam, and the big gun was so hot it melted into the foam, which wasn't really what I was wanting to do. So that's the only thing, is if you're putting this size glue gun on, it's not that hot. But if you're, oh, there I am, don't worry. But if you're putting sort of a normal amount of glue on from a big gun, it will just blow. These are such a nightmare to take a photo of on a white background. These videos, which were for this ebook I never did, they were all on white backgrounds. Yeah, here we go. Masking tape. So masking tape, I've just got a little comment here on a couple of key tapes. So these are technically glue attached to tape, so I'm going to go with it. I use masking tape all the time to glue down my minis, terrain, diorama parts, whatever it is for painting. And I've got loads of card pieces, I stretch it out, turn the ends under, shove it against it and use that. And I use it all the time, just cheap blue masking tape to hold stuff down when I'm painting. That is what I use masking tape for 90% of the time. But it's also really useful when you're doing scenery and you need to build up, and say you have a gap and you want to fill it, put a bit of masking tape down and then put over a bit of tile and tile grout, white glue and sort of sand water mix, so it's nice and thick. Put that over the top, that'll set up. Doesn't matter, the masking tape's not that solid. So I use masking tape a lot, I have to say, this blue cheap stuff. It's horrendous. I wouldn't actually use it on a model for masking, but I use it all the time for sticking stuff to be painted. Ooh. Mark says, I've used hot glue a few times and it all gets messy. Maybe it's me. Now I use Everglue instead. Yeah, I use it a lot for like putting magnets in to my minis. The base of the minis has a hole that's 2.5 mil and my magnets are 2 mil. I need to fill that gap. Some people say they use green stuff. I'm like, I just put a big wad of hot glue in, squidge it down. So I've got magnet, ferro sheet underneath, wax paper, a magnet, it's a big one, with the mini sort of, put the glue on the magnet, put the mini on, squash it down, the ferro sheet holds the magnet flat to the floor, mini goes down flush, hot glue fills the gap. Every now and then they fall out and I put them back in with super glue. So yeah, but it's useful because it's gap filling. That's where it's really useful. So timber, I think the Mech products dry quicker than you can get the other parts together. Nice way by Revel Contact Professional Glue, especially as it's a great applicator. It's interesting because I never put my parts together with glue on them ever when I'm doing plastic glue. I have them already together and I then put the plastic glue into the gap, the join. Only time I ever put glue on is sometimes when I'm putting an arm into a mini or something, and I'll put a little bit of glue on both to almost like soften them up a bit. I put them in and I'll still always drop a little bit more into the gap with a very fine brush. I always use capillary action with those glues. I never ever use them, and I guess it's because I started with Mech and it did just dry. So you always capillary action everything. You get it all perfectly lined up and then you put your glue on. Right, I've never tried the Revel glues though. I see them in the shops, but I've never tried them. So Raymond, super glue and epoxy eat foam. They do. You can get foam safe super glue now, so you don't have to worry about that. But and actually, I sometimes get super glue near foam, and I think it depends how much you're putting on. And also, a lot of I glue my foam with white glue. Everyone says you shouldn't, but if you leave a slight air gap, it will eventually go off. But I tend to use hot glue for foam, or use that Gorilla Glue, which is the what's the name of it? It's the one that's like a honey colour. You spray it with water and put it together, and it's got another name that's not a brand name, polycarbonate or something like that. polyurethane glue. I use that for if I'm wanting to, and my Gorilla Glue hasn't gone off in the bottle again, then I'll tend to use that one for gluing foam because it does glue well. But yeah, it's a good point that you have to watch your glues with foam. Winston Smith, if you're trying to glue foam to foam, try paint primer. There's a primer made by Behr in the US that's great for sticking large areas of foam to foam where white glue would remain wet in the middle. Yeah, again, if it's a US product, I probably won't get it over here because I remember raving about spray putty and nobody in the US can get it because it's too expensive. Yet over in Europe, spray putty's everywhere. So there's definitely a difference. It's like people going on about Bondo. You can't get Bondo in the UK easily without paying a fortune. And some of the ones people rave about, I just look at the amount they use and I go, yeah, I'll use spray putty, thank you. Or I'll use a big boy car filler. So it's really difficult when you talk about brand names, which is why I'm reluctant to talk about brand names a lot on this, because whatever brand you use will be the one that's local to you that you can get hold of. And I don't think there's a huge amount of difference. So when it comes to sticking foam, I will use the polyurethane. It sets with water. You can spray it with water, put it on, and that's the one. It's a water-based primer to foam safe. But if you're in the US, go try Winston's Behr paint primer. So Norm says, for model railroading, if you have a small gap in your base, just use masking tape to fill the gap and then do your scenery over it. Yep, that's exactly what I use it for. And also, where you're putting in point motors and you've got a hole to allow them to move, I'll often just put masking tape around it to narrow the gap a bit once it's in place, because you often drill a big round hole and then you try and put ballast there and it all falls down onto your tortoise motor, whatever motor you're using, showing my age there. Whereas a little bit of masking tape can make it much narrower. Raymond Legg says silicone glue is good for foam. I've not really tried silicone glue for foam. That's an interesting one. Tamsin, another useful glue for terrain makers if you're making your own tufts, carpet tacking glue. Ooh, all the tips are coming out here. There we go, carpet tacking glue. Timber, don't use white PVA for large foam insulation areas as the water and the glue won't dry out deep inside, takes days. Yeah, I've used, for large areas I use the Gorilla Glue, but for small areas I use white glue. And I put it on in a zigzag. I don't dry it, I don't smooth it out completely. And if you do a zigzag, there's a little bit more space for the air to get to it than if you smooth it all out completely and create this perfect sort of smooth surface. So Timber says, best is Gorilla Glue, purely urethane, spray one side of water as it's the catalyst, sets it off, not air. There we go, just what I was saying, definitely. Secret Animac, sorry peeps, gotta go, we'll catch up later. Bye. I don't know if you've gone already, but see you later. Tim, I once tried Yoo-hoo on foam board. It reacted with the foam and partially dissolved it. Yeah. You can get solvent-free Yoo-hoo now, which probably won't do that, just to let you know. It doesn't glue as well, but it may be fine on foam. And again, Yoo-hoo's hard to find in the US, whereas Yoo-hoo's everywhere here. This is the trouble with these brand name glues. It does become really hard to find them. It's like Americans talk about taking a Tylenol. I have no idea whether that's paracetamol or codeine or aspirin or any of the normal types of drugs we take here, because we generally call them by their actual chemical names, whereas in America they talk by brand names, and so I have no idea what they're talking about. But yeah, it's funny. So Tamden said, you who do a foam safe glue now. Yep. Tamden, good to know for next time. I had that solvent-free Yoo-hoo, but it still got too much dampness in, and I was using it on card, and it warped the card a bit, just to warn you if you're doing that. So I mentioned masking tape, just for gluing stuff for painting. The other thing that I use more and more, but it's not always successful, I use this for hanging backdrops sometimes. I'll get there in a sec. And I use it for sticking things down from painting, but it's a little too vicious. But if you're trying to do two flat surfaces next to each other, this product coming up next, when this little video finishes playing and we get to the next section, is really, really useful. Let's see if anyone can guess what it is before it gets there. I thought this masking tape was like a 2-minute section. Look at it, it's just going round beautifully. There we go, let's look at a chat. Yoo-hoo is a chocolate drink in the US. Is it? Yahoo is a Yoo-hoo. Yeah, I think I know. We get it here, I think. So Stephen thinks Tylenol is ibuprofen. Oh, that's interesting. It's paracetamol. You see? Us Brits, it's just like some American painkiller, but I wouldn't know which one it is. Paracetamol. Bostik is very similar to Yoo-hoo. That's true. So Raymond says, I have some old Builder Plus N-scale cardboard buildings I've not assembled. You can get cardboard glue as well, which is, you kind of apply it both sides, it goes slightly tacky, and then you put it together. So Tim, I think Tylenol is paracetamol. Used to spend a lot of time in the US and learned most of the translations. Advil equals ibuprofen. Really? Blue tack. You can use blue tack. I use it again for holding things for painting, and I use it for holding stuff I don't want to be fixed in place on a diorama, like people, but I use black tack. So Tim will tell you all the people on Port de Norwich are black tacked into place, so they fall over regularly. He'll probably glue them when he's done. But I was still photoing it, so I had them movable. But I prefer black tack. So double-sided tape. This is a good one. I do love double-sided tape for putting long, thin things glued down. So where I said my hot glue had come off, where I'd done this wood back on a diorama, I probably would now use double-sided tape, because it's actually really easy to use. You get plenty of time, you put one side down, then you peel it off, and you can peel it off in sections if you need to glue. I've used it for backdrops. The only thing I'll say about backdrops is if they get slightly warped over time, they often billow round it. So you're probably best just to do it at the top and sides and let it billow in the middle, whereas I did it with a middle strip and it does show. But I just find double-sided tape really useful. But it is a bit vicious. It pulled a foot off one of my guys when I used it to stick things for spray painting, when I took them off. But it's just another useful thing in your arsenal. Rubber cement dust stinks. It's ammonia. Lee Lavery, did you know ibuprofen was invented by Boots back when they had a research department? I did not know that, but Boots the chemist. Yeah. Acetaminophen is Tylenol. What? What is acetaminophen? Oh wow, I have no idea what that is. We don't seem to have that as a painkiller in the UK. Blue tack, sort of like plasticine, but a bit more sticky. Yeah, I do use it also for masking. It's useful for masking camo and stuff. Or Advil is anti-inflammatory, Tylenol for pain. So yeah, that's because Advil is ibuprofen, which is anti-inflammatory, which will do a little bit of pain depending what your pain is, and Tylenol is paracetamol, which is for pain, which is all they give you in hospital really here. But yeah, that makes sense. Not recommending those medically, obviously, just commenting to myself. Please don't use this as medical advice. Blue tack leaches oil over time, so don't use it long term on paper. No, and it can leave residue on your minis if you then want to paint them. So Raymond, I mostly buy generic medicines over the name brands. They work the same to me. It's hard in the UK to get anything but generic. If you go to any chemist, you'll just get the chemical name, ibuprofen, paracetamol. That's what you'll buy. You won't buy a brand name. It's only when they're adding in like caffeine or something into it, or quick release. But yeah, there we go. Andy Stevens says, once used Yoo-hoo, the original yellow tube, to make a HO waterfall. Worked quite well, but I think there are better products now. There's always better products now. The trouble is, can you afford to buy them all to test them to see if they're better? But yeah, it would work quite well. And people use it mixed with bloody coloured paints to make blood spatter and gore and stuff. There we go. Acetaminophen and paracetamol are the same thing, just to add the naming confusion. It has two chemical names. Oh, I am confused, so it is just paracetamol. Timber, mention the difference between permanent and semi-permanent double-sided tape. There's a difference between permanent and semi-permanent double-sided tape. I mean, I just bought double-sided tape, Timber, but apparently Timber says there's a difference between permanent and semi-permanent. So this will be the permanent stuff. This is really solid. But I'm guessing there's some double-sided that are able to, not as sticky perhaps. The one thing I also use is a Scotch tape that I got from the US that is just the glue. It doesn't have the tape element, and I use that for roofing. So double-sided tape is excellent for sticking down roof tiles. When you're roofing, you just put strips and strips and strips of double-sided tape down, and you can just put your tile strips down if that's what you're doing, and it's brilliant for that. And you need the permanent one. But I actually use this Scotch one that is just glue. There's no actual tape to it, but I think if all I had was the tape, I'd use that just as happily. Double-sided foam mounting tape comes in handy. Yeah, it adds a bit of gap into things if you want that. Wow, David's coming up with paracetamol. It's N-acetyl para-aminophenol in the rest of the world, just acetaminophen in the US. Okay, so it's another thing where we all call it different names. Anyone use cling wrap to make waterfall, says Raymond. I use it as a basis to put another product over, because if I can't peel it off, then it is still clear and it can be there. But I don't use it on its own. I will always put it, I always try and remove it. And I generally use a clear plastic bag now. But yeah, but I've seen people use it and it can look good. I just prefer the look of, say, a gloss product. Andrew Stevenson, I've become a bit of a fan of black tack. Really good for sticking little things down that you need to undo later. Yeah, me too. Black tack is brilliant. Semi-permanent is used for temporary work. I'm guessing timber, yeah. I hadn't really noticed. This is craft double-sided sticky tape. I bought a bag of about 10 of them and nicked the rest off my mum. So Tim says, the black tack people on Port Diluting have been gradually falling off, so many are now stored in one of the trucks that came with the layout. I'll glue them back as the last task. Yeah, when I know where they want to be permanently, I put them on with tacky white glue. And that's what I generally do. But because they were getting photographed, I hadn't glued them down properly. And one of the problems with Port Diluting is it's got a pigment layer as its final layer, or a dusty layer over the top. And you're putting a tacky onto dust, and the dust just comes off. So when you put the glue down, you often have to glue them to get it into that layer underneath that's a bit more solid. So Polite, I have thin, transparent, double-sided adhesive tape, more than I can ever handle. Ideal for sticking self-printed paper pictures on illuminated signs. Too bad the stuff ages very quickly. Oh, I've not seen it age up. The one I use for the roofs has never had a problem, but they're all quite thick paper, I guess. I think you pronounced it ibuprofen. No, it's ibuprofen, but ibuprofen. Well, yeah. Timber, you can get it apart easier. Permanent is very strong permanent. This is probably too permanent for glue for what I need it for when I'm spray painting, which is why I use masking tape. But it's perfect when you're gluing, using it as a glue proxy for big stuff. Right, Monsville, when gluing a paper backdrop to a backboard, is wallpaper paste the best product to use? I just use PVA, but I've actually used double-sided sticky tape the last few times I've done it because it's smaller. I've done it, but it has bubbled a little, so I wouldn't say it was necessarily the best idea. But I like double-sided sticky tape a lot for sticking down large flat things. It's just easier to control. Oh, and as Norm says, 3M spray adhesive is great for gluing down large areas. So a spray adhesive is good. And what's good about the 3M spray adhesive is it's not water-based, so it won't distort your backdrop. So we said we talk about wet water. Now, wet water is the thing you use when gluing to wick into everything to get rid of all of the sort of surface tension, so that when you put your glue on, it will just straight through all your scenery in a nice kind of manner. I use isopropyl alcohol, about 1/3 to 2/3 water in a spray bottle, and I lightly mist it on so it doesn't disturb the scenery, and then I get it heavier and heavier. I also have it in a dripper bottle, so when I'm doing like ballast on track, I will put it on with the spray to bed it down. Ooh, sneak preview. And once I've got it bedded down where I need it, I will then put on the heavier dropper bottle that is more likely to disturb the scenery. So this is wet water. But you don't have to use isopropyl alcohol or water. I mean, I have so much of it for 3D printing. I buy it 10 litres at a time or 5 litres at a time. And, you know, my wash and cure station takes 7 litres, so you can see how much I use if I need to do a change on that. But you can also use something called phenol. There's a plant-based phenol, oh, I don't know. So I have a bottle of it somewhere upstairs that someone recommended, which also cuts through. You can use dishwasher rinse aid. You can use, all the soapy ones work, like Fairy Liquid. I just worry about them putting bubbles in, so I tend not to use them, because when you're dripping you can sometimes put bubbles into your stuff. But you want something that cuts the surface tension. So anything that would act as an emulsifier in normal life will work as a wet water stuff. Monsville says she used PVA once and it warped the 3mm plywood sheet. I can imagine that. That's why I tend to use this sticky tape now. Water glues can affect the printer backdrops. A photomat spray is better. So getting good advice there. Digger, I've used double-sided tape for my back scenes. So yeah, another vote for double-sided tape. Raymond, I wanted to have real water on a HO layout, but I changed my mind. I did some footage of the old 1950s line layout that had real water. I don't think real water looks real in scale, but let's leave that for another day, because it just doesn't ripple or look right. So wet water is vital. We talked about it a bit earlier, and I do recommend you have it in both a spray and a dripper bottle. Sometimes if it balls on the surface, you can just spray more on to settle it back out, or put a little bit more product, scenery product, whatever it was, on top. But generally, because I have isopropyl alcohol in the house, like bottles and bottles of it, that's what I use. I know other people use things, whatever they have in the house. Whatever you have is probably the best thing. In the US, they have something called rubbing alcohol that's 75%. If you're diluting down, you can use that. Now, I'm just going to make an honourable mention for a few other things that you'll need when you're gluing. Disposable cups, if you're mixing thinning glue, mixing it up with tile grout. I often put it in cheap plastic containers that I've got. But, you know, these are brilliant. There's shot glasses, there's small glasses, and there's pint glasses for the size. If you're using it as a sealer, you may need to thin it slightly. If you're mixing it with paint, you probably want it in a sealable container. But you'll also need spray bottles. Again, shooting all these white items on a white background was hard. But you can see a variety of spray bottles. Fine spray, dropper bottles. These needlepoint ones are a nightmare to fill up, by the way, because they've got very small tops. But loads of different types. I prefer the trigger action to the pump action. If you're doing a lot of spraying, it just is easier on the hands. But you're going to need those to apply your glue, because rarely do you ever want it out the bottle, especially if you've got a 5 litre bottle of water. In fact, I keep my Mod Podge in a milk bottle, a milk container. If you're American, I don't know what you use, but we have plastic 2-pint milk containers, and I just shake it up, and I've got the line at the bottom that I pour full of Mod Podge, and then I add water on, and I use it to fill up all my various different things with my Dilute Matte Mod Podge. So I do a whole batch at a time and just fill them up, and that has been really useful because I've got a kind of consistent amount now that I know will go, marked on the side of it. The other thing I use a lot, not the ones on the left because those are very expensive brushes, but the other thing I use a lot to apply glue are brushes. It's really useful if you're putting it on. Sometimes I'll smooth it out with like a rail ticket or a business card. I also use foam disposable brushes a lot, but they just didn't have to be in this photo. And so brushes are really, really useful for applying glue, especially if you're doing it as a sealant stage and you put paint in it or something. It's paint and Mod Podge, you'll be wanting to paint it on with the bigger brushes because it's just like sealing. And then I've got a couple of really small tatty old ones. They tend to go down through usage to be tatty glue ones. So if they're ruined, it's not a problem. So that middle brush doesn't look anything like that now because I've used it so much. The sort of weathered one. But yeah, they're really good. The main thing I use though is coming in a sec, and that's a cocktail stick. Here we go. So cocktail sticks. And that is the main thing I use to apply small amounts of super glue, small amounts of white glue. The bigger ones I tend to use just for stirring stuff. So this is stirrers and glue applicators. There we go. Ooh, what do we got here? Phenyl ethoxylate. Thank you for that. That will be the, that's Timber telling me what the plant one was that you can also use it as a wet water, sort of it cuts surface tension. Raymond Legg, I'm still trying to invent dry water. I think it's called ice. David, funnily enough, I had a follow HO scale working water mill that comes complete with pump. It works but never looked like real water. They also have a working log flume that you can buy for your like amusement park, and it uses real water. And I was just like, my water is so hard here. It will be clogged up with limescale within weeks. I wouldn't use real water on a model, just to be clear. I just don't want it going everywhere. So, Stephen, the 3 things that can't be scaled down are water, smoke, and tea. Tea. Let's all guess what the tea is going to be. So, water, no. Smoke, actually, I think you can sometimes scale smoke down, but I know what you mean. They have dry water powder. You just add water. Okay. Kitchen bathroom cleaner spray bottles are free. That's very true. They are. If you can get one that does a fine enough spray, then that's cool. Yeah, the dehydrated stuff, Norm. Tongue depressors. What? Yeah, I use them. I'd call them lollipop sticks. Stephen, sorry, I cut myself off. I meant to say the effect of gravity on an object. Okay, right, that was not something I was going to guess from tea. Tamsin, another product group that can be used for adhesives is acrylic filler cork. Yeah, I didn't really put that on there. I have some clear, it's a hybrid polymer. It's a Clear Fix by EvoStick, I think, or Everbuild. It's one of those two. And I use that. It's for mirrors and things. I use that when I'm gluing water. It's it is slightly repellent, but it's not pure silicone. So it's quite useful because it dries really clear. It's what I've used for a lot of my water as well. So that's cool. But yeah, all of those corks, people use them a lot when they're doing lane track and things. I just want to do an honourable mention to cleaning up your glue when you get it where you don't want it. Always have a handy supply of micro brushes and cotton buds nearby so you can wipe the glue off before it has set. You can still wipe super glue off before it sets too much. Most surfaces will take that. And just remove it before it causes problems. Nothing says model more than a glue splodge. And yeah, be kind to yourself, have them somewhere really obvious so the glue doesn't set while you're scrambling around trying to find them. And another one, kitchen towel. This is all about, we're getting near the end of these, but it's all about trying to keep everything clean and tidy. You will spill glue, you will get it everywhere. Just, if you're going to be spraying, put kitchen towel around so you don't cover your worktop with a fine spray. Just be very careful and tidy and clean, especially when you have a brand new white studio. So yeah. Tim, you must be on a different water source to me. I get Welsh water from the Elan Valley. You're lucky. When I lived on the other side of my little village, I got Welsh water from the Elan Valley. And Tim says he has a 25-year-old electric kettle that's never been descaled. I can still see the copper element. Yeah, when I lived, it's where I grew up. So I had 20 plus years of beautifully soft Welsh water. Now I'm on Coventry water and it's as hard as you can get it practically. I think it actually comes from Worcester side. And it's really hard. And my kettle is permanently scaled. My taps, you can chip the lime scale off them within a few weeks. Literally it sits there and where, you've got those little chrome ones that the water drips onto. It is literally, every drip leaves lime scale. It's one of the biggest lime scale, and it's because I'm on Worcester water rather than Birmingham water, which comes from the Elan Valley. So yeah. My friend who actually lives further along in the village, she was on Birmingham water. So I really don't understand why I'm on their water. It just moved around, but yeah. But I agree with Timber, water never looks right as scale water, but is available as realistic scale water from the same supplier that does the Mojo replacement pills. Okay, that doesn't make sense to me. Silicone corking is good for adhering foam. Thanks, Norm. You're not the first person to suggest that, so probably one to try. And then Tamsin, or more expensively, acrylic modelling paste. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine that mounts up. But okay, I had an honourable mention for protective gear. If you're using some of these things, you need to be wearing gloves. If you're, I don't think you really need a face mask for them, but do the if you're spraying the cyanoacrylic zapper, it is quite a pungent smell and it does not smell good for you. So I would definitely do it in a well vented room, and I'd probably have my extractor fan going for it if I was spraying a lot, but I keep forgetting to turn it on because I'm not used to having one. It is definitely a there's a lot of chemicals going around, and if you use them a lot, they could build up over time. So just take care of yourself. Remember that your health is important. Mark, very hard water I am too. Yeah, it's a nightmare. Digger, why that's expensive fixed washing machines and dishwashers? I don't really use mine. I have a dishwasher. I haven't used it in about 20 years. So I was just going to do an honourable mention for grass glues. So grass glues are slightly different. They're PVA, but they've got something in them. So PVA dries by skinning the surface, and then drying out and shrinking over time as the water comes out. Grass glues have an additive that stops it skinning as quickly, so it stays tacky for longer. So you want kind of a tacky glue for grass glue. I use PVA all the time. It really depends on your humidity and your heat as to how quickly your PVA dries. If your PVA is drying too quickly, do a smaller area is the answer. But you know, it is important that you can buy grass glues. I'm still using mine up. They do actually go quite a long way. And I was given it free by Knock. It is really, you know, just one of those things. You don't need to have it. I've used just matte medium. I've used matte Mod Podge. Yeah. Oh, I apply with a chip brush or something like that for static glue, static grass glue. If you want to do little like clumps or, you know, tufts of grass, use a small brush, just dot it around. And the final thing that's on here that I think is really important is the layering spray, which is probably going to get a little bubble in a minute. But layering spray, ooh, yes, I've just done a bottle for some reason. I have no idea why that bottle is highlighted, but let's just go with it. These are from old videos and I put them together to talk about. But the layering spray, which is really, this is a brilliant one. In the US, you couldn't get the aerosol because you couldn't export it there. And this is a Pico, but WWS are the manufacturers, and you can get it from them. And it's an acrylic spray, and it sprays on, and it lets you add another layer on. Now you can do the same yourself with Dilute Matte Mod Podge, but the layering spray is just nice and handy and dries slightly more quickly than Dilute Matte Mod Podge because it sprays a thicker glue. So just an honourable mention for that layering spray. It is really good, and 2 layers to your grass makes a huge difference. I cannot tell you how much difference having an extra layer of grass makes. And if you want it in tufts, rip little holes in bits of paper and spray, so you're only putting tufts amounts worth of grass on when you do the layering spray. But that's really just an honourable mention for grass. So Tamsin has the same limescale problem in North London. Yeah, it's better for you actually. It's better for heart disease to be in a hard water area. Everyone's moaning about their water now. If it smells dodgy, assume it is dodgy. That's a good rule of thumb there, Stephen. WWS swear their static basing glue is not PVA based. Well, it may not be PVA based, but you can just use PVA. I don't know what it would. I think the Knock one might be PVA based. Right at the end now. I think I am. So let's go back to full size me. I think the Knock one might be PVA based because when I look at it, it feels very PVA-y. But I actually don't like the WWS basing glue because it's very thin and it dries incredibly shiny, and it just does my head in because it's so shiny. So I have a lot of it, but I wouldn't use it because it's so shiny. So it may not be, but I don't use theirs, so that'll be why. Why is it so shiny? Oh, it's just, yeah. And it is quite thin. It's definitely, that isn't PVA, that's definitely something else. But the knock one that was there is, I think, a PVA with an additive in to stop it skinning as much. But Martin was the person who told me about all this. Norm says multiple layers in different millimetres and colours works great for static grass. It really does, and actually one of the future videos that I do on Back to Basics, I am going to be doing Thunderbirds. I'm just struggling with time at the moment. One of those will be about static grass. It's really quite runny, Tamsin, and it's slightly creamy coloured, and it dries shiny, but I don't know what the active ingredient is. Well, 10 minutes left. So this is my chance to plug my Kickstarter. I put the link at the top, but I'm just putting it again because cunningly it was thankfully still copied. So I have a Kickstarter that starts at the end of September. It's currently not even designed. Bits of it are, but it's currently, as I'm designing it, coming out on videos. So if you saw the most recent lava video I did, those are the terrain tiles for this Kickstarter. It's got waterfalls, it's got a factory, a lava factory one end. It's kind of based on Star Wars Mustafar, Lava Planet, because it's a really cool planet. And the factory is based on Battlefront 2 Sullust, which has dark red lava and a lava factory, which is really interesting. So I'm busy designing that at the moment, and it's all looking really fun. I've got a couple of months of designing and printing, and I'm trying to render and do stuff like that as I go. But I'm afraid the next couple of weeks are really going to be tidying. I need to sort all these boxes and rubbish that's around my house, I really do. I just went straight back to work and didn't tidy anything after the building works finished in March, and I still can't even get into some rooms from the amount of boxes. And it's taken me this long to build the, bookshelves and stuff to put stuff away and to get it. The workshop's 90% done, but yeah, it's all just lingering, so I need to get on and do that. But I put it off this afternoon. I said I designed lava this morning, and this afternoon I went and played Jedi Survivor. I finished Jedi Survivor, the campaign. I'm just going around getting all the collectibles, but I'm stuck on 2 fractures, and so anyway, I'm doing all the collectibles. If you're into gaming, that'll make sense. If you're not, don't worry. It just involves a lot of running around places you've already been to, looking for various little routes you've not been down before, so you can say you've explored everywhere and picked up every item. It just lets the game linger on a lot longer, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm not just doing Star Wars for my lava, but actually I struggle to think of other sci-fi influences that I have that have huge amounts of lava in. So this is a very Star Warsy one. But I'm also getting, so I will be doing some minis with a collaboration with a mini designer, and I'm also, well, I'm not designing, they are. And I'm also doing a ship. So John from Second Dynasty designed an Epsilon bomber, which is a bit like the bomber, the Y-wing, which is really cool. And it's inspired by. And there's a Delta transport from Second Dynasty that he's going to do as an add-on. So the Epsilon will come with the campaign, but the Delta, which is like a Millennium Falcon, I'm doing it at 125% because it's 28mm. And I'm printing it at the moment, so that's taking one of my 4 printers. And the first piece was, well, the first big piece came off, and it's a piece about this big because I've obviously made it quarter bigger, and it took 2.5 days to print. So that's all coming off. And Ben very generously, obviously we're working out how to do that, but he's very generously said I can run that as an add-on on the campaign. So I'm very excited by that. Now, a lot of people may already have the Delta if they follow Ben, but if you haven't, it's a great ship, and it's one of his older ones, and he keeps promising to redo it. But he's also got a hammerhead that I've got, and I'd like to print that as well. So this has displaced the hammerhead because I just didn't have. Yeah, I may eventually do it, but it's going to be 26 inches across by the time it's done. And it's not the Millennium Falcon because it's not that configuration. It's another Corellian light freighter-like thing. But obviously they're all inspired by, because nobody wants to be done with a cease and desist from Star Wars. So although mine's a Mustafar style board, it's inspired by rather than directly copied. So I kind of look at the elements and then try not to copy them exactly. try to use them as inspiration of how things should look, rather than just going, I'm going to slavishly copy this, because part of the fun is the creativity. But it's also fun just looking at all the art books and everything. So I've had a lot of fun. I've got the book of vehicles, the book of worlds, planets, you know, all that kind of stuff, going through looking at all the design influences. And then you look at the real thing as well. So you go and look at all sorts of things, and you Google, you know, I want a turbine. What does a turbine look like? Because I designed some turbines a couple of weeks ago. So I'm really enjoying designing this sort of stuff. It's really fun to do. But if you go and sign up on the pre-launch page, is just a pre-launch page that will let you know when it goes live. Hopefully it'll be the 28th of September. But yeah, it's just a fun. If you don't do terrain games and wonder why I've picked suddenly to move into this, it's because there's a big market and I need this to earn me money. So I need to pick somewhere that has a market. And one of the problems with doing railways is I live in the UK. There's a big market in the US, like most of the people who backed me for the last campaign for Kickstarter were in the US. But everyone's so regional, and I just look at doing buildings and things like that and scenery, and I struggle to work out what niche to do. But I love creating sci-fi worlds and things like that. So this is it's going to be amazing. It's Corix the Lava Moon. So it's a whole lava moon full of things. And there's going to be a Vader's castle style castle as well if you want, but you could easily not do those if you didn't feel like that was your thing. There's going to be plenty of options to keep you amused. So last look at chat. Monique, I borrowed a bad static grass applicator to try, and you really need to vacuum it 3 minutes after applying the grass to make the grass stand up better. Yeah, bad static applicators do have that problem, and longer grass is worse. I always hoover my grass to get it to go upright, even with the more expensive applicators that I have. But if you get the pro ones, not the ones that you'll get from a hobby company, their grass is really zinging upright. But small grass will stay upright with a good applicator. Part of it is down to glue. Does your glue grab it immediately? Part of it is down to the applicator, and part of it is just down to length of grass. Oh, Norm, the lava video is great. The modulars are very cool. Thank you. I was actually surprised. So I've got print testers who come and test my stuff for free. They get the products and they test it. And I've got some excellent print testers. Tamsin, who's on here, is one of them. And still supporting me anyway. So thank you very much, Tamsin. And they're all interested in different bits of it. And I thought, well, terrain tiles, because most of the games I do use battle mats, not tiles, wouldn't be that popular. But actually, two of the people who were testing it specifically wanted terrain tiles. And one of my plans was that I would always do an environment terrain tile for every single one, so that you could create a board of whatever size you want. They're in 6-inch tiles, because most games are 6-inch divisible. You know, that you'd be able over time to perhaps put them together. So you could have lava at one end and snow at the other if you wanted. Well, whether that would work or not, I don't know. But you can have lava in a factory, or you can make the whole board in lava. So I've designed about 40 tiles, and I've got more that I know I need to do. So there's a whole kind of I've got to really buckle down after next week. I've got a week where I'm taking my sister to my dad's, and I'm going to have to work while I'm there. But yeah, I'm going to have to really buckle down, just knock out some of these things. I've got a whole factory, modular factory to build as well. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a big set. It's going to be a really big set. But yeah. And then, of course, I have all these print tests I'm not quite sure what to do with. And I've got loads of dioramas I'm not quite sure what to do with. They're not shippable. They're just not shippable. But I need to clear out my house of some of the dioramas that are just knocking around, really, that I don't really want to display, partly because they're too big. A lot of them are the bigger ones. So if anyone's seen a diorama they're really interested in, let me know, especially if they can collect it. That'd be cool. But otherwise, you know, I'm always keeping the Star Wars ones, so don't ask about those. But, you know, if there's any of the older sort of railway ones that you'd like, then let me know. So, quick look. Tamsin says, also the colour of the static grass, some colours seem to get the static better than others. I have never noticed that. Oh, I'll have to think about that one now. And then Mark, good night everyone. Great stream, Kathy. Kept me glued to my screen all evening. Okay, I'm going now. Look forward to your next Kickstarter. Thank you very much. So guys, we've got 4 minutes left. I guess it's one of those things I can waffle for 4 minutes, 3 minutes quite happily. But I just want to take this chance to thank you for listening. If you've got any questions and you're watching this on playback, do put the comments. I will answer them. You know, it's not necessarily the most exciting thing, but obviously it kept Mark glued. But glue is just important. If you get the wrong glue, it can screw up your whole project. You know, and there are people who things have fallen apart on. They've used the wrong glue. They've had cracking. There's so many things that can go wrong if you don't understand which glue to use in the right position. So it's worth understanding the glues that you have. But I actually didn't name that many. I only did 4 or 5 glues there. So you can get by with most stuff with white glue, super glue, maybe epoxy for stronger stuff. Use case, something like polyurethane for foam and hot glue. You know, you can get by with mostly just those. You don't need to have tons and tons of glues in your arsenal. But that's it, folks. Digger, you still have most of your own. I have all my dioramas apart from one which I've sold. So yes, I do have all of them. It's just not enough space. So I do need to get rid of some. Stephen, Mary carries a lot of static electricity. Often joke with her if she used a static grass applicator, we'd have a green ceiling. Oh, bless. Right, good night, everybody. Have a wonderful time. Get some really great modelling done, and I will see you all in a month's time. Oh, can't wait. I'm not quite sure. It might be basic tools and materials next time. If anybody has any great ideas about what they'd like to talk about, then that'd be cool. But I think it might be a what's in your toolbox, basic tools and materials stream. So, yep, because I know I won't have got any Thunderbirds done by then yet. The Thunderbirds are still there. I'm really excited to do them. I just need not to be modelling full-time doing a Kickstarter as well. Anyway, night, folks. Take care and have a good week. See ya.